Before we get too far into this, I would like to say that I do have some praise for the original environmental groups, just as Tzipora praised the oil patch. The world initially benefited from the work of environmental groups. Since the 1970s, due to more public and policymaker attention on issues of pollution and such like Western nations, particularly Canada and Alberta, have set very high environmental and air quality standards, which are well observed for the most part. Most companies are compliant, and many are extremely proactive. And they almost never get any credit for that. However, since the Climate Works Foundation has been pushing climate catastrophe via environmental groups, policies have become very destructive to the world and have damaged the most vulnerable among us, and I'll detail that later. Today, environmental groups have tremendous sway over policymakers and the public, yet they're unaccountable and unelected, and they're engaging in economic and geopolitical warfare on behalf of their corporate and anonymous donor-advised sponsors. In particular, they've focused their efforts on Canada. The Climate Works Foundation Podesta WikiLeaks documents revealed the details of a case study on the very program that Matthew Nisbet had written about back in 2013. The Climate Works Design to Win case study revealed that the funders had garnered valuable intelligence, either from their contracted data analysts and/or from their fundees. It's not clear, for instance, to what extent groups that were reporting back to Climate Works may have also been conveying what might have been considered privileged information from so-called stakeholder groups, like those that Ms. Berman spoke about setting up with the CEOs of major oil sands firms. So I would like to ask the question, were the 4 years of CEO dinners that Ms. Berman discussed, where the environmentalists and oil sands executives met, were they a means of building trust and then having the foreign-funded ENGOs cull insider information, piece it together from their talks? And I ask, was that reported back to the Climate Works partners, who then were in a position to use it against Alberta, the Alberta government, and to use it against the same Canadian corporations who took steps to do the right thing on the environment and engage? I believe this is plausible. I do not have an answer to that question, but circumstantially, I do have things to say that suggest this is true. I won't have the time to go through all the grand details that I think are relevant to this story, but let's pick a few. Ms. Berman used to be with Greenpeace. In 2009, Greenpeace was funded by the Oak Foundation, a Climate Works partner. The grant document says to initiate 3 distinct but interrelated efforts concerning the tar sands in Alberta, to enhance the ability of Greenpeace Canada to more effectively launch and deliver its phase-out tar sands campaign. Secondly, to leverage the growing interest of ranchers and landowners in limiting unbridled oil and gas exploration and production in southern Alberta. And thirdly, to conduct specialized opinion research and media work to identify messaging for these and other efforts that will generate maximum information value among Albertans. For this, they got some $436,475 from the Oak Foundation. But that's just the beginning of the Greenpeace attacks on the oil sands. In 2010, they got another nearly $500,000 from the Oak for the following: to create awareness of the financial, regulatory, and political uncertainty that surrounds investments in the tar sands, so that prominent financial analysts, media, opinion leaders, and members of Parliament will publicly express concern about the lack of government regulation of the oil sands, both within and outside Canada. This will encourage the withdrawal of major institutional investors from the tar sands by 2012. The end of France's tar sands subsidy, the passage of feed-in tariff in Alberta utilized by farmers, ranchers, landowners, and investors to develop the province's huge wind power potential. And if you remember, about that time, CBC did a documentary called The Tipping Point, Age of the Oil Sands, in which they denigrated the oil sands. And this was based on research done by Schindler and Kelly, and that was funded by Tides. Then associated groups went on to create and exacerbate that alleged risk. through things like the 2008 tar sands campaign, which Vivian Krause found and reported on. There was the Rethink Alberta campaign, the UK tar sands network, BankTrack, and more. In Quebec, millions of dollars have been granted from Oak and other ClimateWorks partners to the anti-oil Global Climate Change Action Group, known as Tick-Tick-Tick.org, which now claims to have an alliance of 470 ENGOs in 70 countries which are opposed to fossil fuels. So no wonder Energy East could not go anywhere. Ms. Berman spoke proudly of Alberta's 2016 climate plan, implemented by the current government, but not a word about Alberta's first climate legislation of 2002. This was the leading climate and environmental legislation in North America, implemented in response to the Kyoto Protocol. In fact, Albertans had done due diligence on the issue of climate change science as well. The Alberta government engaged Dr. Madhav Kandekar in 2000 to do a study of the climate science claims of Kyoto. Unlike Dr. Suzuki, who was granted an honorary doctorate by the U of A earlier this year, Dr. Kandekar is a real climate scientist, a former regional expert for the World Meteorological Organization, a former Environment Canada researcher of some 40 years, author of hundreds of peer-reviewed papers and a peer reviewer himself, and a past expert reviewer of the IPCC reports. Dr. Kandekar noted that there were many uncertainties in the theory of greenhouse gas-induced climate change in his report, which was commissioned by the Alberta government. And in an interview this spring, he noted that those uncertainties are still the same, perhaps greater, some 18 years onward. This is from a scientist, not an activist. Is anyone listening? Zipporah Berman claims it's not fair that people have to flee fires and floods due to climate change. Well, Zippy, move to another planet. Life is not fair, and natural occurrences happen all the time. And looking at history is a good way to put this in perspective. On the topic of wildfires, the largest wildfire in North America was in 1950, right here in Alberta and BC, the Chingchanga firestorm. It burnt 3.5 million acres of forest in northern Alberta and BC, near where Premier Notley grew up. The smoke pall was seen around the world.